initiates reading Torah on Monday morning, Thursday morning, and Shabbos morning. That's Ezra's practice. So that, again, in the 450s BCE, this is 2022, so that's 2,470 years ago, BCE. That's Ezra.
Would it have been in scroll form? Would it have been in scroll form?
Let's see. Give me a second. Do I have time? Oh, man, running late.
Go ahead, you're already rolling, man. People are loving it.
Am I online? I don't have a Tanakh with me. I don't like quoting from memory because I always forget things. I don't have a Tanakh with me. So from memory, the answer is yes. It appears that the Torah that Ezra was reading from was a scroll. Now, the other thing is, when you and I look at a Torah scroll, we know what we're holding, right? We've got the wooden handles and we have the garment that covers it, which protects the Torah scroll. The wooden rollers are probably a later invention. I don't know exactly when wooden rollers become the norm. And I'm just kind of skimming in my head, and I can't give you an answer. But the wooden rollers are only handles. By themselves, they're not really that important. They're only important because they're attached to a Torah, and it makes it easier to roll the scroll. But if you didn't have the wooden rollers, you just kind of manhandle the scroll and just kind of roll it that way.
There'd be less wear on the Torah material with those wheels.
Yes, there's less wear on the Torah material because you've got the rollers, and so the weight as you're rolling the parchment is displaced from the parchment onto the wooden rollers. It's an apparatus, obviously. So the wooden rollers have been around for hundreds of years. I mean, we know, I'm just picturing in a couple of books, like art books that I've seen, that we've seen Torahs that are, probably from the, at least the 1400s, maybe earlier ago than the 1400s, that had wooden rollers on them. But I don't know exactly when somebody first innovated the idea of putting wooden rollers on the parchment, but there was just a convenience. And you don't really need the outer cover. We call it a parochet, a cover for the Torah. You don't need that, but it protects it. So why would you not want to protect the Torah? So we have the parochet, the beged, the garment. But the parchment, I mean, the scroll that we have today is accurately resembling the scroll from the time of Ezra 2,400 years ago. That's what, now, you have to remember something else, though. In the time of Ezra, there was a different Hebrew writing. There was the first writing, no, Hebrew. There was the first writing, and then there's the second writing. The Hebrew that you and I read now is called New Hebrew, which comes along about 2,000 years ago. Prior to New Hebrew was Old Hebrew. The fancy term is Paleo Hebrew. So in the time period from Moses down to Ezra, and a little bit later than Ezra, Hebrew documents that were written in the old alphabet. It was called Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, but the letters were very different. They did not look like Hebrew today. So I can recognize a few letters of Paleo Hebrew, but I don't know Paleo. I mean, I'd have to pull a chart out from a book and then learn the letters and then try to read. So there's no point in my reading Paleo Hebrew because most documents in the world today in Hebrew are not written in Paleo Hebrew. And furthermore, the exciting is that we know this because when you look at some, only some, not most, of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you will see occasional words written in Paleo Hebrew. Because the Dead Sea Scrolls inhabit the time period when there was a transition from old Paleo Hebrew to New Hebrew. So there are people who were still writing Old Hebrew or Paleo-Hebrew during the beginning of the Dead Sea Scrolls time period, and there are people who were writing the New Hebrew near the end of the Dead Sea Scrolls community because New Hebrew had become the fashion. So another benefit of having the Dead Sea Scrolls in our lives is that it testifies to the transition between Paleo-Hebrew and New Hebrew. And if you ask, why did people change their alphabet? The answer is because they thought the new alphabet was sexier, was prettier, was more attractive. That's the reason. It's found in the Talmud. So they thought the new Hebrew looked better, and so they adopted a new font. It was a new font, but it's handwritten, obviously. So our Torahs are written in the New Hebrew, whereas in the time period of Ezra, the Torah would have been written in Old Hebrew, Paleo-Hebrew. Paleo, P-A-L-E-O, like paleontologist, which means old, paleo. So if you want to Google Paleo-Hebrew, that's the technical term, and you'll see.
Believing it or I'm not, you know, and I read it a lot. And what you said, maybe about 99% of it, is it that book? Very good book. No, at least I'm not reading anything that's only 20%.
So now we're coming back to our service, and if you have a talis at home and you want to join us, you want to say the bracha. It's lehit atef batzitzit. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehit atef batzitzit. And we begin this morning on page 99. It's the prayer for the soul. To those joining in online, somebody here asked a question about Ezra, and so we sidetracked a little bit. Ezra, who's called Ezra HaSofer, Ezra the scribe, is associated with the editing of the Torah in its final form, the final 5 books, as we have it today. And we could say, without exaggeration, that Ezra helped to establish the soul of the Jewish people as we are today. Great transitions from Moses all the way down until the time of Ezra. And many Jewish people have never heard the name Ezra and do not know that there's a book in the Bible called the Book of Ezra. And the colleague book, or the sister book, is called the Book of Nehemiah. Our friends in Mobile here say Nehemiah, but Nehemiah is the Hebrew way of pronouncing his name. And Ezra and Nehemiah paint that picture of Jewish people who leave Babylonia, Persia behind and choose to come back to Israel and reestablish the temple. Since the first temple was destroyed by Babylonia, and they leave Babylonia and Persia, and they come back to build the temple, we call that the Second Temple. And the Second Temple operates for about 580 years or so until it's destroyed by Rome. So Ezra and Nehemiah are key figures in rejuvenating the Jewish people, breathing a breath of life into their soul. And a side note, since we're just rambling right now, the book of Ezekiel in the Tanakh, the book of Ezekiel, a major prophet, speaks of what it means to have a communal soul breathe back into the communal body. It's symbolic, it's figurative, it's a poetic idea. The communal soul is breathing and communal body is coming back to life again. And here we're thinking of the individual soul. Each one of us is a handmade spiritual essence from the touch of God, and that's the soul. My God, the soul that you have given me is pure. Elohai neshama shenatata bi torahi. You created it, you formed it, you breathed it into me. You watch over it when it is in me. In the future you will take it from me, but then restore it to me in the world that is coming. As long as this soul is within me, I thank you, Adonai, my God and God of my ancestors, ruler of all creation, master of all souls. Baruch atah Adonai, who restores the soul to the lifeless form. Awakening every day is an opportunity for you and me to reflect upon what it means to be a soul. And if you ask me what a soul is, I can't tell you. But in my own mind, I have this little viewpoint. I think the soul is a small mirror of God. I think in my mind, the soul is a small mirror of God. So each one of us is a small mirror of God. Each one of us literally mirrors and reflects God. But when you hold up a mirror over here, there's a slightly different view. Hold up a mirror here, hold up a mirror here. We've all been in rooms where there are mirrors and you stand and there are different views and perspectives and angles. So there are 8 billion people on the planet, which means that there are 8 billion different little mirrors of God. And each one is going to reflect a slightly different element of God. Every single soul, every person is priceless. And that's the Jewish gift to humanity. We rise the early morning blessings on page 103 and 104, pages 103 and 104. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher natan lasech v'bina l'havchin ben yom u'ben layla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam sha'asani b'tzalmo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam sha'asani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam sha'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam malbish arumim. Top of 104. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam roka haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam hamechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam sha'asa likol sarki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam ozer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam oter Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam hanoten le'oef koach. Unenu hayom v'chol yom l'achenu chesed rachamim b'einecha v'necha ro'enu tigmalenu chasadim tovim. Baruch atah Adonai gomel chaterimo Yisrael. The bottom of page 104 on the English side. Today and every day, may you look upon us, and may all who see us look upon us with eyes filled with kindness, love, and compassion. Act toward us with kindly love. Baruch atah Adonai, who acts with kindly love to the people Israel. This is a plea to God to promote within every person kindness and respect when every person looks at every other person in the world. So when you and I are walking around and we see somebody on the street, behind the grocery register, wherever it might be, every interaction that we have, dozens of interactions per day, constitute looking from one person to the other. How do we promote respect and kindness in every single interaction? In Judaism it says that needs to be a touch of God. And you and I can take hold of that. And it's up to you and me. When we choose to interact with somebody, are we going to allow that element, that teaching message, to look at somebody else with kindness and respect, or are we going to prejudge somebody, jump to conclusions, and treat somebody inappropriately? We are seated, turning now to Baruch Shalmar, excuse me, on page 122. Baruch Shamar v'haya ha'olam Baruch Hu Baruch Oseh v'Reishit Baruch Omer v'Oseh Baruch Ozer u'Mekayim Baruch Merachem al haaretz, Baruch Merachem al habriot, Baruch Mishalem Sachar Tov L'Reav, Baruch Chavad V'Kayom Lo Netzach, Baruch Podeh U'Matzil, Baruch Shemo. On the English side, the singular one who gives life to the world, the sovereign who is praised and glorified forever and ever. This is your great name, Baruch Atah Adonai, sovereign, celebrated with songs of praise. Yachid Olamim, Melech Mishibachim Far, Hadei Shemo Gadol, Baruch Atah Adonai, Nachol Abatish Bachot. We turn now to page 127, a psalm on page 127. And I want to look just at the opening 3 or 4 stanzas on the English side. The title of this psalm is for the leader of Song of David, Lamanasech Mizmor David, but just the first 4 lines. The heavens tell of God's glory, and the sky proclaims God's handiwork. One day addresses another, and one night informs the next. What's this psalm teaching? Psalm's teaching that the world itself sings. The world itself is talking about God. And not only the skies and the heavens and the earth and all elements within creation, but time itself talks about God. Day and night are time. Time itself is speaking of the glory and the beauty and the majesty of God. Time itself praises God. That's exciting. On page 136, Ashrei. Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, Od Yalucha Selo, Ashreyom Shekalchalo, Ashreyom Shadonoi Elot, Tehillah David, Haramim Kol HaMelech, V'Abrachashim Chal Yolam Voed, B'chol Yom Avarchecha, V'Halala Shim Chal Yolam Voed, Gadol Arnoi Malal Mod, V'Ligdoto En Cheker, Dolero Yishabach Masecha, V'Gvurotecha Yagidu, Hadar Kavod Hodecha, V'Divrei Niflotecha Sicha, Ve'ezuz Nor Techa Yomero, V'Gedolatcha Asapreno, Zecherav Tuvacha Yabio, V'Tzid Katacha Yeranenu, Chanun Rachum Adonai, Erech Alpayim Ugdo Chased, Tovar Elakov, Rachamav Alkol Ma'asov, Yoduchanoi Kol Ma'asecha, V'Chasidecha Yevarchucha, Kavod Malchutcha Yomero, Gvoratcha Yedaberu, Lodia Livnei Hadam Gvurotav, V'Chavod Hadar Malchuto, Malchutcha Malchut Kol Olamim, Omem Shaltecha B'Chodor V'Ador, Somech Hanei L'Chol Hanoflim, V'Zokef L'Chol Hakfufim, Henei Chol Elech Yesabero, V'Ata Noten Lohem Et Achlam B'Ito, Poteach Et Yodecha, U'Maspia L'Chol Charatzon, Tzadik Adonai B'Chol Drachav, V'Chasid B'Chol Ma'asov, Karov Adonai L'Chol Korov, L'Chol Asher Yikra'u V'Emet, Ritzon Rev Ya'aseh, V'Yet Shabbatam Yishma B'Yoshiem, Shomer Adonai Et Kol Avav, V'Yet Kol Hashem Yashmin, Tehillah Adonai Daber Pim, V'Vorech Kol Basar Shem Kachol Elam Voed, V'Anachnu Nevarech Yah Me'ata V'Yad Olam, Hallelujah. And on page 141 at the top of the page, Hallelujah, El Bekodsho, Hallelujah, Berkiaozo, Hallelujah, Vigvorotav, Hallelujah, Kerav Gula, Hallelujah, Beteka Shofar, Hallelujah, Benevel Bechinor, Hallelujah, Betofu Machol, Hallelujah, Beminim Yugav, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Betzil Tzalei Shama, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Betzil Tzalei Trua, Kol Anshama Hallelujah, 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 Kol Anshama Hallelujah, Hallelujah, Hallelujah. The last line of the psalm, which we just sang, opens the door into the mind of the biblical poet, the psalmist, 3,000 years ago, ascribed to David, or perhaps a school of musicians and poets that began with King David and then came down later after David. So starting 3,000 years ago and migrating down a few hundred years, but let's not quibble about centuries. But the mindset of the Tehillim, and we say this every single day of the year, is that every soul can connect with God. It doesn't say every Israelite soul. It says every soul, any soul. Kol Neshama Hallelujah. Every Siddur on the planet has this passage in it every single day of the year. For at least 2,000 years we've been teaching this message that everyone can connect with God. And when I look at the news and I see ever more factionalism, ever more strident voices that you have to be just like me and you can't be, if you're not like me, you are on the outs. And many people call for the destruction of the other. And I say, our message, which is old, is as contemporary as every day. Not everybody has to be identical. Far from it. Everybody has access. Everybody is unique. Everybody is a source of blessing. So what are you going to do with that, humanity? We have 8 billion vessels of beauty and purity, 8 billion souls. How are you going to walk out the door into the world today? All of you. You have a capacity for good and a capacity for evil. Make a choice. And Judaism and Torah and Tehillim teach, make the right choice. Page 145. Nishmat kol chaim tevarech et shimcha Adonai Eloheinu Baruch Haba Control. On page 147, the first red arrow is Shochen Ad. Shochen Ad Morom V'kadosh Shemo V'chatuv Ranenu Tzadikim B'Adonai Laisharim Nova Tehillah B'fi Yesharim Titalal U'b'divrei Tzadikim Titbarach U'b'lshon Chasidim Titramam U'b'kerev Kiddushim Titkadash U'b'makalot Rivavot Amcha Beit Yisrael Lodo Lahalel L'shabech L'faer L'rameim Lahader L'vrech L'leu Kales Al Kol Rishro B'tish B'chot David Ben Yishai Abducha Meshichacha Yishtabach Shimcha Lord Malkeinu Hoel HaMelech Hagadol v'Hakadosh b'Shamayim u'v'Haaretz ki lecha Noel Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avoteinu v'Imotenu Shir u'Shavacha Halel v'Zimra Ozu Memshala Netzach Gedula u'Gvura Tehila v'Tiferet Kiddusha u'Malchut Brachot v'Horot Me'ata v'Ad Olam Baruch atah Adonai El Melech Batish Bachot El Odot Adonai Niflot Abucher B'Shirei Zimra Melech Achei Olamim. Please rise to the top of 150. We rise because of the bracha, the statement of praise of God, of creating the entire universe. Genesis is in our minds right now as we prepare for the Shema. The book of Breshit, the book of Genesis, is in our minds. That's how we get ready for the Shema, by thinking about creation, physical reality. And Shema is listen to each other. So the listening of every Israelite to every fellow Jew is against the backdrop of all reality of space-time. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Yotzer Borech Hoshech Oseh Shalom Uvarei Et HaKol. Baruch atah Adonai, our God, sovereign of time and space, forming light and creating darkness, bringing harmony while creating all. We are seated. Excuse me. And on page 154, the introduction to the Shema. Remember, the Shema is against the backdrop of the physicality of life and of all experience. And when we call out Shema Yisrael, we're actually saying that I need to listen to you and you need to listen to me as to who we are. The introduction, the first paragraph on the top of page 154. You've loved us deeply, Adonai, our God, and showered us with boundless compassion. Avinu Malkeinu, for the sake of our ancestors who trusted in you and to whom you taught the laws of life, so may you be gracious to us and instruct us. Kind Creator, have compassion for us. Open our hearts so that we may understand and with love discern, hear, and study. Observe, perform, and fulfill all the teachings of your Torah with love. Enlighten our eyes with your Torah. Attach our hearts to your mitzvot. Unify our hearts to love and revere your name so that we never lose hope. As we trust in your great, holy, awe-inspiring name, we will delight and rejoice in your deliverance. The bottom stanza, page 154. V'havienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot haaretz v'tolichenu kamemiyot le'artzenu ki el Yeshuot ata Uvanu v'charta mikolam v'lashon v'keraftanu l'shimcha hagadol sela be'emet lahodot lecha ol yachercha v'ahava baruch atah Adonai Habocher b'Amo Yisrael be'ahava. 155. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadavarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha yom al levavecha V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam b'shivtecha b'veitecha u'v'lechtecha v'derech u'v'shachbecha v'kumecha u'kishartam la'ot al yadecha v'hayu l'totafot b'neinecha u'ktavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'v'sharecha. V'yom shon yisrael shon tzabet me'imada et v'chivotam b'chol yishu painful the middle of page 156. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor daber El B'nai Yisrael, V'amarta Alehem, V'asu Lehem Tzitzit, Al Kanfei Vigdehem L'Dorotam, V'nadnu Al Tzitzit, Hakanah Pitil Techelet, V'yalachem L'Tzitzit, Uritem Oto, Uschartem, Et Kol Mitzvot Adonai, V'asitem Otam, V'lo Taturu Acharei L'vavchem Yacharei Enechem, Asher Etem Zonim Achareihem, V'man Tizkaru V'asitem Et Kol Mitzvotai, V'yitem Kedoshim L'olechem, Ani Lechem, Asher Etzeiti Etchem Eretz Mitzrayim, Liot Lachem L'Elohim, Ani Eloi Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem Emet. Pardon me. The middle of page 157 on the English side. One stanza in the center of the little red arrow. Truly, you are Adonai, our God, and the God of our ancestors, our sovereign and our ancestors' sovereign, our Redeemer and our ancestors' Redeemer. You are our Creator and the rock of our deliverance, our Redeemer and help. So you are known throughout time, for there is no God but you. Mi Chamocha, the middle of page 158. Mi Chamocha, Boilim Adonai, Mi Chamocha, Nedar B'Kodesh, Noratilot, Osei Fele, Shira Chadasha, Shimchu Geulim, Leshimcha Al Sifat Hayam, Yachad Kulam, Hodu V'Mechu V'Yamro, Adonai Yimloch, Le'olam Va'ed, Tzur Yisrael, Koma Be'ezrat Yisrael, Ovadei Chinumecha, Yehuda V'Yisrael, Go Aleinu, Adonai Tzvot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael. We begin aloud on pages 159 and 160, and thereafter we continue in silence. The traditional text concludes on 166. Again, 159 and 160, moment of shared prayer and singing, and thereafter in silence. Today I invite you to take hold of the ark, the Aron. And you see here a representation of the Kotel, which is 2,000 years old, and the substratum, the below the foundation, is 3,000 years old. And of course, it's the best known Jewish site in all of Jewish life, Jewish history. And when people go to Israel, if they're so inclined, they go to the Kotel and they pray, and they stand there in history, on the threshold of history. But also, we have modern Israel, which is part of the continuum of all of Jewish life and Jewish history. So today I'm going to turn my back, not being rude, but I'm going to be looking at the ark, and I invite you, look at the ark and send forth your prayers and see yourselves as standing on the threshold of Jewish history, as constituting Jewish history, along with all Jewish people all around the world. The first two pages of the Amidah aloud, thereafter in silence. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor, Vanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, Zocher Chasdei Avot B'imahot, Umevi goel libnei v'nehem, l'man shmo b'yahava. Melech ozer fokenu Mashiach umagen. Baruch atah Adonai. Magen Avraham ufoked Sarah. Atah gibor le'olam Adonai. Mechayei metim atah Rav laHoshia. Mechalkel chayim b'chesed. Mechayei metim b'rachamim rabim. Somek noflim v'rofei cholim. Umatir asurim, umekayem emunato, lishenei afar, micha mocha ba'al gevurot, umidam elach, melech mimit, umechayeh, umat me'ag Yeshua, v'ne'eman atalachayot metim. Baruch atah Adonai mechayei hametim. I found the Tanakh, so I'm skimming through Ezra. I'll get to it in a minute, because I'm going to find that place. Okay, so here we are. We're on page 168, Ein Kamocha, page 168. En kamocha Elohim Adonai v'en kamasecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim umemshaltecha b'chol dor v'ador Adonai malach Adonai malach Adonai imloch Leolam voed Adonai oznem o yitem Adonai yevarech et amova shalom of harachamim heitiv avirtzoncha et Zion tivnech hamat Yerushalayim tivnech hamat Yerushalayim kivecha levad batachnu melech el ram benisa Adon olamim. Please rise as the Aron is opened. Vayhi bin so Aharon Vayomer Moshe Kuma Adonai V'yafutzu oevecha V'yanusu misanecha mipanecha Ki mitzion tetzei Torah Ki mitzion tetzei Torah udavar Adonai mirushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah La'amo Yisrael B'Kedushato. Ribono Shel Olam, I'll make a trade with you. I'll give you exemption from listening to my prayers. I'll give you exemption from listening and hearing the prayers of the people in this synagogue today if you take hold of and hear the prayers of the people in Ukraine, in Buffalo, and in Orange, California, and beyond. If you take hold of and hear the prayers of all the people who are crying out because of violence and of war, if you take hold of and hear their prayers and see their tears and bring relief and comfort to them, and also in some way into the hearts and the minds of those people who are cruel, who brandish guns and swords and knives and bombs, if you take hold of and hear all those prayers and respond, then I grant you leave to ignore mine. And if you don't, God, then you need to hear mine over and over and over again. Bottom of page 170. Be'an arachetz v'lishmei kadisha yakira Anna emar tushbechan Be'an arachetz v'lishmei kadisha yakira Anna emar tushbechan Yehira avakadamach Tiftach li v'yoraita v'tashli mish'alin d'libi v'liba d'chol amach Yisrael l'tavu l'chayin v'lishlam. Amen. On page 171.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonai, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonai, Kadosh Shemo. Gadol Adonai Tin Rama Shema Yachtav. Lecha Adonai HaGedola VeHaGevura VaTiferet VeHaNetzach VeHod Ki Chol HaShamayim Uvaretz Ki Chol HaShamayim Uvaretz Lecha Adonai HaMamlecha VaMidnaseh Lechol Rosh Romemo Adonai Eloheinu Ve'ishtachabo Lahadam Raglav Kadoshu Romemo Adonai Eloheinu Ve'ishtachabo Lehar Kodsho Ki Kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. We are seated. We are seated, and I'm almost there, folks. So while you're turning to the Torah reading for the day, which will be on page 740 in the red Chumash, 740. Allow me one more minute. Page 740. Okay, Bugs, I'm still not there. It's been a while since I studied Ezra, so I feel like I'm close. I'm close. Okay, I'm not going to make you wait. I'll work on it, and I'll try to get that to you before the end of the service. So now we're on page 740. We're in the parsha known as Bahar in Vayikra chapter 25. And Bahar stands out for a number of reasons. Number one, the word Bahar means on a mountain. When you and I use the term Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, what we're really doing is we're making a mistake. We're using English and not Hebrew. Har means mountain. Sinai is Sinai. Sinai is the name of a desert. Har Sinai means a mountain in a desert named Sinai. The mountain itself has no name. The desert has a name, and that's Sinai. Har Sinai means a mountain somewhere in the Sinai desert. English grammar has superimposed and capitalized M and S and made it Mount Sinai. We don't know the name of the mountain where the big 10 words were shared. It could have been a mountain named Bubba, or Jobab, or way down yonder. The mountain is not named. The Sinai region is named. And I'm belaboring this because from the Torah's point of view, I think, the name of the mountain is irrelevant. what happened there, that moment shared between God and the people of Israel, that's the most relevant thing for all time. And about a year after the great 10 words are shared between Moses and God and the people of Israel, the people of Israel, having constructed a tabernacle, a portable structure of worship, are getting ready to leave this unnamed mountain and start moving towards the promised land. And additional laws come forth. So you and I would say that an additional revelation took place. And that's what's happening here in this Torah reading. So we would say that this Torah reading is about a year or 13 months or so after the great 10 words. I want that clear. And we're here near the end of the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. And so the challenge for you and me is, if God had just shared the big 10, maybe a year ago, what in God's mind could be equal and necessary to supplement the 10 great words now a year later in this week's Torah reading? What could be greater than, I'm the Lord thy God who took you out of the land of Egypt, there shall be no other gods besides me, and revere my name, and don't kill, don't steal, and all the others? What else could parallel that in importance to be shared on Har? The name of the parsha is Har. And the answer is that every 7 years, if somebody owes a debt to someone else, that debt is canceled. And 7 times 7 is 49, and in the 50th year, and there is a calendar that's maintaining, we still have the calendar, because last year we were in the 7th year. It's called Shemitah. We lost Jubilee. Somewhere we lost the number 50. We know where the 7 is, but we just don't know when the 50 is. But evidently in the ancient times, every 50th year, there were certain financial requirements that were the law of the land of Israel. And the goal of these laws was to make sure that one person did not take excessive advantage over somebody else when he or she was potentially in debt. Because if somebody is indebted, that means he's not free. And freedom is the essential element for an Israelite. Freedom is the essential element for a Jew. If somebody is indebted, then he has a burden upon his shoulders, and she is bowed down under the weight of what borders on slavery. And you and I know how God hated slavery. Pharaoh, Egypt, 10 plagues, Passover, Haggadah, Matzah, Maror, Charosis, etc. And how often we talk about Egypt and getting out of slavery. And that's why, about a year after the big 10 words are shared, that the next statement that comes forth from Har, a mountain somewhere in a desert, and the name is not necessary, but the words are, and the words speak of, if somebody is indebted, then you do your level best as a society to make him come out of that indebtedness so he can walk along with his head held high. Because everybody deserves a sense of self-respect and self-honor. We legislate self-respect and self-honor because one person is the world. Every person is a world. That's what's going on in Bahar. And now you understand why, when you look at page 740, take a wild guess, folks. Take a gander here, Americans. The very top line on the English side of page 740, it's chapter 25, verse number 10. And you shall proclaim liberty throughout the land for all its inhabitants thereof. The Hebrew is probably translated better release, but there's another way of translating release to liberty. You shall proclaim liberty throughout the land for all its inhabitants thereof. Who knows that phrase? Miss Deborah? It's on the Liberty Bell. In Philadelphia, that's Pennsylvania, not the other Philly. And now you know why this is important. Because our colonial ancestors here in America recognized that liberty and freedom for all is an essential ingredient, if not the essential ingredient for society. And it comes out of Bahar, the Parsha named from a mountain somewhere in a desert. And the reading that we're actually reading today is here on page 743, one brief aliyah, page 743, verse number 35 of chapter number 25 here in Vayikra, V'chiyamucha chicha. V'chiyamucha chicha u'mataydo imach v'gazakta bo'ger b'toshav v'chayimach Al tikach meito neshek v'tarbid v'yeret me'elohecha b'chay chichimach et kaspecha lo titein lo v'anoshech u'marbid lo titein achacha ani Elohem ma'asher tzeti et ha'meretz Mitzrayim lo teit lechem et eretz Canaan liot lechem le'Elohim. Which means that in the event that one of your neighbors, your people, ends up being overwhelmed by debt and he comes under your control, he owes you money and you actually have control over him, what are you supposed to do? Ger v'toshav, whether he's an Israelite or whether he's not from around here, are you? You're supposed to bring him in, v'chayimach, to strengthen him and have him live with you. The mandate for social justice and freedom and economic independence is a mandate of holiness and sanctity. This is the word that comes on a mountain from somewhere in a desert about maybe 13 months after the Ten Commandments. And as we say with Paul Harvey, and now you know the rest of the story. We offer Misha Barak a prayer of healing for our loved ones. And if you know someone's name, please mention your loved one at this time. Excuse me, and we say, Misha Barak Avtenu Avim Mitzvim Sorov Rachel B'Leil Hibrek Rapid Kol Chamelev V'Kolel Et Shirabot Bat Sarah David Shlomo Ben Tovanacham Navaronit Bat Aliza Tom McCarthy Victor Kansulin Karnia Chaya Bat Sarimenu Pat Cockrell Rivka Bat Chavshalivsha Yudas Bas Laverne Kadiel Gal Ben Sarimenu Yinta Bat Gisha Tobalea bat Freda, Hamud ben Gisha, Elea bat Aviva, Claudia Thomas, Spencer Babashi, Miriam Babashi, George Patinos, Wendy Fassman, Tom Bastoni, Avi Moshe ben Menochana, Billy Singleton, Yaakov ben Liora, Diane Sizemore, Amen. O God, as you have blessed our mothers and our fathers, bring forth healing and strength upon all those whose names are mentioned today, all those who are remembered in our hearts with our love. See our love as reflective of your love and healing, O God. Bring forth your touch of renewed life, renewed vitality, and greater health and well-being for all those mentioned today and all those kept in our hearts. Bring your angel Raphael, the angel of healing presence, and station that angel by the sides of every person, named and known only to you. Bring forth your chen, your divine love, and lift us all up May those who are afflicted of body, of mind, of spirit, stand up taller and greater, and may they walk forward into this next week with health, peace, hope, and newfound courage. And we all say, Amen. I want to touch on just one line in the Haftarah for today, which is on page 759. 759. The Haftarah is from the book of Jeremiah, chapter number 32. Jeremiah, not only a bullfrog, but a Jewish guy, lived about 2,600 years ago, and he was living during the time period when Babylonia was ascending, and then Babylonia came in, besieged Jerusalem, and eventually destroyed the city of Jerusalem, the temple, took the large majority of Jewish people as slaves to Babylonia. The rest were killed during this war. And of course, that's the destruction of the first temple. And Jeremiah is experiencing this, and he's writing about it in two places, one in the book of Jeremiah and one in the book known as Lamentations, or Echa, found at the tail end of the Hebrew Bible. And Jeremiah performs this bizarre act, which is actually associated with a passage in today's story reading that I skipped because I was trying to keep things short. But along with, in the Torah reading, making sure that people were economically free, if I own land and then I sell the land to somebody else, every 50th year the land comes back to me automatically. That's part of the Yovel, or the Jubilee requirement. And the goal is to prevent loss of land from individual clans and persons within each of the 12 tribes. Because every clan, every individual deserves to have 40 acres and a mule, maybe not a mule, but 40 acres in the Holy Land, so that each person can be independent. That's the main gist of the entire Torah reading. Just on the edge of this war, when Babylonia is about to attack the city of Jerusalem in the region of Judah, the tribe of Judah, Jeremiah hears a word from God, you might say, and that's this Haftorah. And Jeremiah is supposed to buy back land from a distant person. And that's the link to the Torah reading, because every 7th year or every 50th year, you're supposed to buy back land and hopefully have every family still be intact and able to take care of his or her own bills by working the land and being a farmer and taking care of animals. That's what Jews did in the ancient days. So here, on the eve of a war, when land values are going to plummet and the commodities market is going to go far south, as you well know, Jeremiah is commanded to buy back land. Why would you buy land? Why would you enter any commercial transaction during a war when no value at all? And the answer from Jeremiah's point of view is to teach the people that this is a short bump in the road, but Jewish history is much bigger than local politics, and we're all going to be living healthy and safe and strong as independent Jews in our land. B'mehera v'yameinu, amen, Selah. That's the goal of this bizarre transaction, and it's found here. It's verse number 9 on page 759. So I bought the land in Anatot from my cousin Hanamel. I weighed out the money to him, 17 pieces of silver. I wrote a deed, sealed it, had it witnessed. I weighed out the silver on the balance. So this is a notarized transaction. He went to the bank, got the witnesses, the money is paid, cash on the barrelhead, right? Verse 11, I took the deed of purchase, the sealed text, and the open one according to the rule of law. This is a slight thing. In ancient Israelite life, you had to have two simultaneous copies of transactions. One open and one that was sealed. And the sealed one is, this shows the two witnesses, I make a transaction with you, it's sealed, it's done, it's notarized, it's filed. And the open one was something that everybody could see. Identical texts, one sealed and closed and put in the probate court, and the other is open text that everybody can know about. So it was to make sure that the transaction was public and transparent. That's what's going on here. Okay, fine. Verse 12, and I gave the deed to Baruch, son of Neriah. Okay, Baruch ben Neriah is Jeremiah's secretary or record keeper. Now, what's amazing is, about 35 years ago, when I was in Israel and I was studying, I went on a tour with this fabulous guide, and he knew archaeology and Jewish history, and he took us to an excavation where a seal had been found in the old city of Jerusalem, and the name on the seal was Baruch ben Neriah. Now, it's possible that it's another Baruch ben Neriah, but it's also possible that that seal found at that excavation 38 years ago is this Baruch ben Neriah, Jeremiah's secretary, which attests to the veracity and corroborates this experience. So we're this close to actually seeing the transaction happening take place, mentioned here in this Haftorah. How's that for a kick in the pants? Isn't that wild? So the point of this elaboration is to show that we Jews take the Bible seriously. It's our life. It's not only a book with a fancy black cover. It's our history and it's our reality. Deborah. Thank you, Devorah. That's cool. Pretty exciting, isn't it? And that's attested in the Mishnah as well, obviously 300 years later, but that becomes the Jewish norm within Jewish tradition. So Murray's raising a question about this, and he's now commenting on a verse on page 760. Excuse me one second. This phrase probably bears something else in mind. If you remember, when the people of Israel at the base of the mountain construct the golden calf, there's chaos that breaks out. There's pandemonium, and eventually people die. Moses takes the tribe of Levi, and they carry forth swords, and they kill 3,000 ringleaders of the golden calf episode, which is terrifying. It's a civil war, you might say, in a very real term. Israelites killing Israelites. And after the 3,000 people are killed, then Moses crushes the golden calf into powder, and he mixes it with water, and he makes other people who are borderline ringleaders drink this. And it's a really painful episode. It ain't fun. It ain't fun at all. It's a very painful experience. And then Moses goes back up to, and he shatters the first set of the Ten Commandments. Remember that. He goes back up to the mountain, and God wants to destroy the entire nation. Moses says, please don't. And then it's Exodus chapter 33 or 34. God reveals God's self to Moses. And the famous phrase is, Adonai, Adonai, Rachum v'chanun, erech hapayim v'rav chesed v'emet, notzer chesed la'alafim nosei avam v'feshev v'chatav v'nakeh v'nakeh. And that phrase is, God is patient and loving and compassionate and forbearing and holds on to the goodness of people for 1,000 generations, but bears the sin of one person for the 3rd or 4th generation. And that's found there, and what it's saying is, perhaps in the time of Moses, that if I mess up really badly, then maybe my sin does affect my descendants, my immediate descendants. Jeremiah, I think, is echoing that phrase. Because this time period, Jeremiah's understanding the reason the temple is being destroyed by Babylonia is that average Jews are corrupt and they're not being respectful and decent to each other. And remember, if the focus in the Torah reading, which is in the mind of Jeremiah, and the focus in Jeremiah is making sure people are not overly burdened by debt, and then Jeremiah sees the beginning of the collapse of the community, that tells us that for them, daily interactions were bad. Jeremiah's not talking about, did you go to shul? Jeremiah's talking about, did you take care of your fellow man? If somebody is hungry or starving or impoverished or burdened by debt or can't get a job or is sick or his family's in trouble, did you take care of those people? That's what Jeremiah's talking about. And I think he's answering his own question by saying, look, God, you are God, and we define you as taking care of people always for 1,000 generations with kindness, but also, holding on to somebody's sin if it's a really bad sin for the third or fourth generation. He's echoing Moses, I think. Now, bearing that in mind, I'm not saying that you and I necessarily agree with everything Jeremiah said. Later on in Jewish tradition, I think we do develop the idea that, and it's very clear later on, that I'm responsible for me and you're responsible for you. I'm not responsible for your behavior. That's unjust. You're not responsible for my behavior. That'd be unjust. And the definition of God is just. The definition of God is just and justice. So it'd be unjust for me to be held accountable for Cindy's behavior. It'd be unjust for Cindy to be held accountable for my behavior. And of course, that permeates the Yom Kippur mindset. And so what you now realize, and what many Jews don't bother to pay attention to, is that Judaism, while deeply rooted in 3,000 years ago, does continue to evolve and change. And that's important to remember. Marie, hold on 1 second. No, we have to go. Cindy?
Why are they sitting in the prison compound?
Jeremiah at one point is thrown in jail because Jewish people don't like Jeremiah. So Jewish people actually imprisoned Jeremiah, and they threw him in jail. And the reason that they threw him in jail is that they didn't like his message. His message was, Jews, you better start getting better, otherwise we're going to have an interior problem. Our society is going to collapse. And guess what happens? The society does collapse, and Babylonia comes in and attacks. So is this the first time that somebody says an unpopular message is thrown in jail? No. Do you and I know in our own history of people who are saying unpopular things being thrown in jail? Of course we do. Okay, so, folks, we need to finish up. Is it short?
Yes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, let's talk about that over Kiddush, okay? Over Kiddush, thank you. So now we're going to conclude, and, excuse me, and I ask that you rise as the Torah is lifted and dressed. Devorah, would you come forward for... B'zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe livnei b'nei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe. Dundai, 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 dai, dundai, 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 dai, dundai, 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 dai, dundai, 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 dai. Eretz Yisrael b'li Torah hikeg Igega bli neshama. Eretz Israel bli Torah. Igega bli neshama. Dundai, 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 dai. 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 Toda rabah. Thank you. Excuse me. Remaining standing, turning to page 177, the bottom of page 177 in the Siddur, a prayer for our country. The bottom of 177, the last stanza. May it be your will that our land be a blessing to all who dwell on earth, and may you cause all peoples to dwell in friendship and freedom. Speedily fulfill the vision of your prophets. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. For all of them, from the least of them to the greatest, shall know me. And let us say, Amen. The top of 178. Avinu Shabbat Shamayim, Zur Yisrael v'Goalo, Borechem Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmichat Gulatenu. Avinu Shabbat Shamayim, stronghold and redeemer of the people Israel. Bless the state of Israel, the beginning of our redemption. Shield it with your love. Spread over it the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them. Crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy. And let us say, Amen. On page 184, the top stanza of the last three lines. Eitz chayim hi lamachazikim ba v'tomcheha meushar deracheha darchei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Chodesh Chodesh Yomenu Chodesh Yomenu Kekedem. Excuse me. Remaining standing, Aleinu, page 205. 205. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, latet gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu k'goyei aratzot, V'lo samanu kimishpachot adama Shelo sam chelkenu kahem V'goraleinu kechol hamonam V'anachnu korim Umishtachavim umodim Lifnei melech malchei amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shehu noteh shamayim yosei haaretz Umoshav yekaro b'shamayim yimal Ushchinatu zol B'gavei meromim Hu Eloheinu ein od Emen malkeinu leves zulato Kakatu b'torato Yodata yom v'shevota El bavecha Ki Adonai hu Elohim B'shamayim mimal V'al haaretz mitachat ein od ein od. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו echad. And now in a moment, the Mourner's Kaddish found on page 207. And in this Shabbat, we as a community remember with great love Jacob Joseph Ratner, Polly Kramer, Esther Grossman Cohen, Katie Enton, Vi Burton, Samuel J. Friedman, Fanny Ribbs Meisler, Agnes Tenenbaum, Rebecca Peretz, Rose Gottlieb, Isaac Friedman, Florence Stiebel, Rose Walters, Herman Finch, Nellie Idelson, Larry Michelle, Ethel Maisel, David Maisel, Reverend Simon Burson, John Webster Jr., Kay Podem, Madeline Fass. Are there any other names to mention today? And perhaps a name shared at home as well. Yitgadol v'yitkadash shemei rabbah ba'olma divrach yirutei v'mlich malchutei b'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael ba'agala v'zman kariv v'miru. Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mivarach la'olam ol'olmei olmayam. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudusha b'rechu la'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran ba'olma v'miru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim olenu v'al kol Yisrael v'miru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'miru. Amen. Our hearts are directed to all those who are grieving, all those who are mourning, and may your loved ones as names be sources of blessing. In a moment, we'll conclude with the Adon Olam on page 211. Just a couple of reminders, of course. Zoom Abdallah tonight at 7, and we, of course, continue to have Tanakh studies at Monday, and Zoom Hebrew and Zoom Spirit on Tuesday. Looking ahead, June 12th is our cemetery cleanup day. June 12th, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Volunteers are being asked to come help paint the gate and also do a little bit of pruning. So if you are skilled, even if you're unskilled, we'll put you to work. It's Sunday morning, June 12th from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. We'll do it in the morning, but we want to beautify our cemetery gates. And again, Adon Olam on page 211, and thereafter Kiddush and Hamotzi, and we hope those joining in at home will also join in for Kiddush and Hamotzi. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yetzir Nivra Li'ei Nasa V'chefzo Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra V'yacharei Kichlot HaKol Levado Yimloch Noram V'hu Aya V'hu Oveh V'hu Yiyeh B'tif Tifara v'hu echad v'ein sheni lam shilo lachbiram b'li reshit b'li tachlit v'lo oz v'hamisra Eli, v'chai goali, v'tzorchev li b'yitzara, v'nisei omanos li, manad kosi, b'yom ekra, b'yado av kidruchi, v'yetishan v'ya'ira, v'imruchi geviyati, Adonai li, v'lo ira. Shabbos, and I'll make Kiddush. Grab some wine or grape juice. Excuse me.
Yishanu v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'Torah tabrit olam evi
Vein b'nei Yisrael oti li'olam Yisheshet yamim asat
Adonai
et ha-shamayim v'et ha'aretz Uvayom Ashvi Shabbat Vayinachash. Okay, Berachanot Yom HaShabbat by Kacheu. God bless the seventh day, made it holy. Sabre Baruch Atah.
Eloheinu melech olam Borei
Puriya Golfen. No Hamotzi.
Baruch atah Adonai
Mishlo.
Eloheinu melech olam hamotzi lehem min haaretz.
Amen. Okay, folks, I found it, and I realized why I couldn't find it because it's in Nehemiah. Might be in Ezra too, but I was just doing a quick skim. But it's in remember, Ezra and Nehemiah are sister books. So in Nehemiah, it's chapter number 8. And there's a big convocation, this assembly in Jerusalem. They are working on rebuilding the temple. And it says, and Nehemiah, who was a governor, and Ezra was a Kohen and a scribe, and they all came to eat and they had to drink. They had an Oneg Shabbat, folks. See, first they had Torah study, and then they ate and drank. That it was a big deal because they had never heard, we think, we don't know, the exact Torah, which tells us that this might be the first time what we call Torah being read publicly happens in the book of Nehemiah, chapter number 8, verses 10, 11, 12, 13. So they had a big nash, they had a big meal, and they all went home. Then they came back the next day. Verse 13, and on the second day, they were gathered together, all the people, clans and tribes, unto Ezra the scribe, to give attention to the words of the law.